Welcome to presentation number 16 in our series Retrieving Romans, Paul's letter to the Romans. The title for today's presentation is Retrieving the Body. And you may wonder what comes of that, but there is a textual basis for the term, for the body, in the passages that we will consider here. So we are not completely finished with Romans 12 and 13, although we have already done one presentation on Romans 12 and one on Romans 13. So the passages today, Romans 12, 3 to 8, and 13, 8 to 14. And then next time we will move ahead into chapter 14. So let's read the text. And we are going to first to conceptualize the notion of body here, using the text in Romans 12. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober-mindedness, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So here is the text we start with, and it is a relational text. How do I see myself in relation to others? How do we see each other in the community of faith? And here is an illustration for what Paul says not to do, to think of oneself sober-mindedly. So there is in some ways here a flat structure, a sense of an egalitarian sense, a sense of mutual interdependence, where the notion that one person is more important than the other or stands above the other is not the ideal that you find in Paul's letter. And it must be a concern. It must be that problem asserted itself in the community, that some people thought themselves maybe more gifted, maybe slated for higher, more influence than others, maybe looking down on others. And Paul is not favoring that, and he will do things to correct it. Maybe more like this, a sense of that we are a body of many hands, and all of us are participants, and all of us are bonded in mutual respect of one another. And here then comes the notion of body. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ. And individually we are members one of another. That's a demanding conception, that we are elements putting together one body. We can sort of think of that as that's meaningful, but to see that we only are a body, or that I am a member of your body, or you a member of my body, that's stranger. We are members one of another. That's the strange part here. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter or encourager in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. So these are descriptions of the body, and I want to use a secular illustration here, and maybe I should ask for forgiveness for doing this, but it has impressed me. So I'm taking a picture from the sports world. This is a soccer coach in Norway, the most legendary soccer coach in Norway. His name here is Nils Arne Eggen. And he used to be an English professor, but he has also been the trainer or the coach for the most successful soccer team in Norwegian history. They won the league and they did extremely well in European competition year in and year out. And he wrote a book called Godfoten. I have translated it in English, The Nimble Foot, the good foot, but it's more than a good foot. It is a nimble foot, a sensitive foot, a foot that is sensitive of your team and your teammates. And the subtitle here is Acting Together or Coordinated Action as the Road to Success. I actually wrote a chapter based on this book for a festschrift in honor of Jan Paulsen, former president of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And you can find my chapter in that book if you can find the book. So here is a picture from 1995. And this is our trainer or coach. And this is his team. And the team consists of quite ordinary Norwegian players. They are pretty good individually, but they are better as a team than you would have expected based on individual proficiencies. So the whole idea here, as they take the field, is that each player must know their fellow player well, and they must play to interact with the fellow player in order to make the fellow player better, to play to his strengths and not to play to that other person's weaknesses. So there is a profound awareness of the rest of the team. And I have participated in church life quite a while, for quite a few years in my career, and I've also been in a pastoral role in a church, and I have thought about these things. How do we function as a team? And I have seen churches with lots of gifts in these churches, but I have not seen them put to use. I have seen a lot of solo playing, a lot of spectacularly clever soloists, but a kind of neglect of using the potential of the whole team. And Paul's imagery here in the text of the believing community as a body that functions together in awareness of each other, that is quite an amazing image, and a notion of leadership too that is spectacular. Of course, he uses the body, not the soccer team, but the body itself, and how integrated the body is, how the body is aware of itself, how there is coordinated action. In medicine, for example, here are two organs that are prominently displayed, the heart and the kidneys. And they of course, are very interdependent. If you have failure of the heart, you are likely to have failure of the kidneys. And if you treat heart failure without paying attention to the kidneys will fail too. So you need to think about have a holistic approach here, or you will kill the patient. Those are images of body that Paul has here in Romans. And now to another picture, and we are now in chapter 13. And my title here is the 10 Commandments and this word. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So here he refers to the 10 Commandments. Actually, he only refers to commandments on the second table of the law. But the whole all of them are implied, whatever other commandment there may be. And he doesn't say, as Jesus does in the Gospels, that you should love God and you should love your neighbor. He thinks that you can accomplish both. You can run a quality test on the believer's sort of range of love by showing how we relate to the neighbor. So he doesn't say we shouldn't love ourselves, but he says that we should love the neighbor as ourselves. And he makes that the sort of take-home message. He is not against the commandments. He wants the commandments to be fulfilled. And he does it by these terms, these perspectives. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. What am I planning to do? Will it harm someone? Will it hurt someone? Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Amazing stuff here in these chapters that are often treated or dismissed as just, ho-hum messages. They are not any such thing. They are very, very evocative and interesting. We read on in chapter 13. Besides this, you know what time it is. How it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. It's quite amazing that he says this in an early phase of the Jesus movement. How he has to say that early on. Did they have that problem even then, first century? That seems more appropriate for our time, but he writes it even then. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. So they must have been believers for a while, at least not many years, that's impossible, but they have been believers for a while, and salvation is getting nearer. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. So here the hourglass is, the sand is running through the hourglass, and we are approaching the end of time, as it were. But knowing that time is not only in terms of progression of time and chronology, it is also the turning of time, the breaking in of the message into human time that Paul is preaching here. There is a statement by James Dunn, who died a few years ago. He is one of the leading Paul scholars of our time, a British scholar, very, very influential. He is the one who coined the term, the new perspective on Paul. And he has a 2-volume commentary on Romans that I would like to read an excerpt from, based with reference to the text we just read. The 20th century scholar, 19 and a half centuries later, and still the darkness of the old age lingers on, cannot help wondering whether the force of the moral imperative is critically weakened by the delay. Can these perspectives still stir us after so many years? That's what he is asking. Can one retain a notion of imminence? And then he answers, but it need not be so, as though these things the shelf life has expired. The sensitivity to the problem caused by the delay for moral earnestness has only emerged in relatively recent times. Even in the 19th century, before infant mortality was so dramatically reduced and life expectancy so dramatically increased, a passage like this could be readily interpreted in the light of the ever-present threat of a life cut short in its prime. Lifetimes are short. When Paul writes his text, he writes to people who do not expect to live very long. And for that reason only, you could have a sense of imminence, that the day is coming soon. a society for whom the finality of death has been pushed back to the margins of concern and largely ignored as a factor influencing lifestyle and conduct, can easily sneer at the improving pieties of Victorian sentimentality about death. Quite a sentence. Such an attitude invites a fearful rejoinder in terms of new and unlooked-for viruses of nuclear catastrophe. This book was written 20 years ago, and he somehow manages to see that even in our time, there are uncertainties. Even in our time, lives are cut short in their prime, as it were. So let's not look down on this text because we think that our lives are more secure. Ironically, and I certainly agree with this part, ironically, in a modern nuclear age, it becomes possible to believe more realistically in the imminence of the end, without the passing of decades reducing the foreboding or expectation, but rather intensifying it for each new generation. So what does he think? He thinks that Paul's passage about the time drawing nearer, about the imminence of the end, should in our time be felt more acutely and not less acutely than in times past. Something to ponder. And now to a text that will occupy the rest of our time in this presentation. A seemingly ho-hum text, were it not for the person who read it and who was influenced by it. I have put as the headline here, living in the day. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. So that is Paul's message to the house churches in Rome, how to conduct oneself, how to avoid certain of the temptations that are rampant in that time. And he uses the term living in the day, living in the light, not in darkness. So it's a very compelling image, and he prescribes for us a code of ethics, a simple code of ethics that includes other things than sexual ethics, but it also includes that. Now, why will we make so much of this text? We will do it because the second most influential reader of Romans, Augustine, in the 3rd, 4th century, or the 4th and 5th century, I should say, Augustine read this text and it changed everything in his life, and it changed many things in history. So here is the book from which I will read some passages, Augustine's Confessions, written maybe around 395 or written toward the end of the 4th century. And it is one of the most widely read books ever written, and it is a kind of spiritual autobiography, so it is in some ways the most influential spiritual autobiography ever written. And here is what we read in a little into this book. Augustine is at this point in the city of Milano, in Milan in Italy, which was a center of Christian influence at the time. When I had told him that I had given much attention to these writings, to Romans, to the New Testament, but to Romans especially, a conversation followed in which he spoke, the person who is speaking, we will hear his names shortly. A conversation followed in which he spoke of Anthony. And you have the dates of Anthony here, 251 to 356. The Egyptian monk, whose name was in high repute among thy servants, although up to that time not familiar to me. Augustine had hardly heard of him. When he learned this, he lingered on the topic, giving us an account of this eminent man and marveling at our ignorance. We in turn were amazed to hear of thy, Augustine writes as though he is talking to God here. We were amazed to hear of thy wonderful works, so fully manifested in recent times, almost in our own, occurring in the true faith and the Catholic Church. We all wondered, that these things were so great, and he, that we had never heard about it. So Augustine wonders, great things, and the person who tells him the story wonders, how is it that you have not heard of it? So let me say a word about Saint Anthony. This person lived early in the Christian history. He was a son of a very well-to-do person who came under the influence of the Christian preaching and decided to leave society to become a monk. He is one of the pioneers of Christian monasticism, of early Christian monasticism. Eventually, he retired to a cave up here about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes from what is today the Suez Canal in Egypt. And I have been there because my daughter, my youngest daughter, Crystal, she worked for a while at the Norwegian embassy in Cairo, and we took a day trip out here to this area. And there is, let's see, where are you? There is Crystal in a church built on these premises. So Augustine in Milano is hearing the story of Saint Anthony, and it grips him. He wonders, maybe I should do that too. This is what true Christianity looks like. That's in Egypt. That's early Christianity in Egypt and its subsequent impact on Augustine. I'll do another thing. I hope it doesn't seem like a digression. We'll try to put things together. Here is a church in Syria, or the ruins of a church in Syria, built in memory or built out of respect of Simon Stylites, who was another person. So you have Anthony in Egypt and you have Simon in Syria, early Christians who come from wealthy backgrounds and decide to commit to a life of celibacy and a life in the desert. They had a huge influence on not only on their time, but on the character of the Christian movement. This is the second largest church built in Eastern Christianity. The only bigger church is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. And can you see this rock here, this elevation? That is the remains of the 40 feet high pillar on which he's Simon on the pillar. So he spent his life, 40 years almost, at the top of that pillar. And here is a little bit of a pitch for education in Norway. So I attended a public school in a small village in Norway, a very small school. We didn't even have school every day. But when I was in 4th grade, I learned about Simon Stylites. I have known about him ever since 4th grade, and I have thought about him many times, how he sat on that pillar. And of course, my frame of reference is Norway with winters, and it's cold. So I felt very sorry for Simon. I wondered how he could do that. I still feel a little sorry for him, even though he lived in warmer climates. So I went there with my daughters once to Syria. This is about an hour from the city of Aleppo that has been in the news. And this is not Simon on the pillar. It's me sitting on what remains of this pillar. This is not made up stuff. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you historically verifiable steps and how this became one of the largest pilgrim churches in early Christianity before the rise of Islam in the part of the world that would eventually be taken over by Islam. In 1965 or 63, the movie maker, I think I have my date right there, maybe I have it wrong a little, but there is a movie made about Simon on the Pillar, Simon of the Desert, by movie makers Louis Buñuel. It is very worth watching, and I sometimes invite people to see it with me. Looking at the map of Christianity, the world, and the quest in Christians to escape the world, that is to say, the character of the monastic movement, you have an amazing map. So here we are looking at the extent of Christianity around 300, which is earlier than Augustine, but it is in the days of Anthony, the monk in Egypt. And these red markers, they are monastic communities. And you see a huge concentration of monastic communities here in Egypt, here in Syria, here in Milano, where Augustine will be, reading about Anthony in Egypt, and here eventually in North Africa, where Augustine will go from Milano and back to his African home continent, and he will be a bishop in Hippo for 35 years, from 395 to 430. And Augustine, this is my point, he has his turning point, he has his big epiphany by reading Paul's letter to the Romans. So, with reference to this map, let's look at this map. So with reference to this map, where you can see the growing expansion of Christianity, but you can also deduce some things about the character of the Christian movement. Here are 2 points I wish to make about it. One is a common point that we all is very widely held. This is the common view. Christianity conquers the world, and in the process it becomes worldly. So it adapts to the world and becomes a power factor, power player in the world. That is the common view. It is true to a point, but it is far from the whole truth. Here is a complementary view, and this is the view I wish to explore a little more here. Christianity conquers the world, but it also repudiates the world. It abandons the world. That's what you see in monasticism. It puts the world under the spell of otherworldliness. So people's ability to live in the world and to have normal lives in the world might actually be quite impaired. That is the alternative view, and it is in some ways attributable to Augustine. And so we have otherworldliness then as a point here, and the embrace of the world, or we have, describing it a little different, Christianity embracing the world with otherworldliness, sort of wrapping the world without wanting to be in the world. You actually want to leave it. And so where am I now? Where are we now? See, we have been around, my daughters and I, because here I am with my youngest daughter in Algeria, in the home country of Augustine, in the city where he was once the bishop. And here in the background is the church built more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago, in French colonial times. That is the current Augustinian church in the city of Annaba. And Annaba used to be called Hippo. Hippo was the city of Augustine. And here is a closer view of the church. And here are ruins, Roman ruins from the days of Augustine in the foreground. And here is Crystal sitting at the steps of the church. And here I am at on the steps of the church in 2009, and here still at the steps of the church, standing with the caretaker and the current Roman Catholic bishop in Hippo or Annaba, a very nice French man who we had a very nice conversation together here in the territory of Augustine. I'm returning now to the book Confessions by Augustine to see what happens and how it relates to Romans. Such was the story Pontitianus told. He's the one who told him about Anthony. But while he was speaking, thou, O Lord, turned me toward myself, taking me from behind my back where I had put myself, while unwilling to exercise self-scrutiny. It's a very interesting metaphor, image. Augustine saying that he had, as it were, stood behind himself, hiding from himself. And now thou didst set me face to face with myself, that I might see how ugly I was, and how crooked and sordid, bespotted and ulcerous. And I looked and I loathed myself, but whither to fly from myself I could not discover. And if I sought to turn my gaze away from myself, he would continue his narrative, Pontitianus. And thou wouldst oppose me to myself and thrust me before my own eyes, that I might discover my iniquity and hate it. So this is Augustine now driven to introspection, looking at himself, no longer standing behind himself, but standing in front of him, as it were. And we read on. So there is Augustine again in a state of spiritual distress. But wretched youth that I was, supremely wretched, even in the very outset of my youth, I had entreated chastity of thee, and had prayed, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet to become sexually abstinent. That is the idea. That's what he means by chastity. For I was afraid lest thou shouldst hear me too soon, and too soon cure me of my disease of lust, which I desired to have satisfied rather than extinguished. He prays to God to help him, and he tells God, don't help me quite yet, let it, wait a minute. And I had wandered through perverse ways of godless superstition, not really sure of it either, but preferring it to be the other, which I did not seek in piety, but opposed in malice. Augustine uses very dark terms for describing himself, and he posits an ideal here that maybe we should not totally embrace, or at least embrace uncritically. He is now in pursuit of celibacy. He is in pursuit of the same type of life that he has read about in Anthony, and that was exemplified in Anthony and in Simon Stylites, Simon on the pillar. And we read on. Meanwhile, my sins were being multiplied. My mistress, he had a common law wife. We have never heard her name, but he had lived with her for 13 years. My mistress was torn from my side as an impediment to my marriage, and my heart which clung to her was torn and wounded till it bled. This is Augustine, a doctored version of what happened. In what way was she torn from him? He told her to leave. That's the truth. It's not like someone else tore her away, but there was a horizon of marriage for him, and he could not marry a person of such low standing as his common law wife. Anyway, and she went back to Africa, vowing to thee never to know any other man, and leaving with me my natural son by her. They had a child together. But I, unhappy as I was and weaker than a woman, could not bear the delay of the 2 years that should elapse before I could obtain the bride I sought. He was thinking that he should marry. And so, since I was not a lover of wedlock, so much as a slave of lust, why didn't he just marry? Well, he didn't. I procured another mistress, not a wife, of course. So he admits the whole thing here. And he makes it look like he had to send his partner away, which is not entirely believable. This is an artistic representation of Augustine and his common law wife. And the person who influences him here is his mother. So this is Monica, his mother, who is playing a role in planning the future life of her son as a Christian in one way or another. So we read on. That I might give way fully to my tears. So still they read, he is hearing the story of Anthony and so on. And he is very much agitated about that. That I might give way fully to my tears and lamentations, I stole away from Alypius, he is his nearest friend. For it seemed to me that solitude was more appropriate for the business of weeping. I was saying these things and weeping in the most bitter contrition of my heart, when suddenly I heard the voice of a boy or a girl, I know not which, coming from the neighboring house, chanting it over and over, Tolle lege, tolle lege, take and read. This is the famous expression from Augustine's autobiography. Pick it up, read it. Pick it up, read it. He thinks it is God talking to him. Immediately I ceased weeping and began most earnestly to think whether it was usual for children in some kind of game to sing such a song. But I could not remember ever having heard the like. And here from a school in America is a statue of the Tolle lege story in Augustine's Confessions. So I quickly returned to the bench where Alypius was sitting. For there I had put down the Apostles' book when I had left there. It's Romans. It's Paul's letter to the Romans. I snatched it up, opened it, and in silence read the paragraph on which my eyes first fell. Not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. This is Romans 13 that we have read as the key text here. I wanted to read no further, nor did I need to, for instantly, as the sentence ended, there was infused in my heart something like the light of full certainty, and all the gloom of doubt vanished away. And Augustine will, on the strength of that text, march forth to a life of celibacy. He will himself become a monk, and he will inscribe a certain narrative, a certain ideal on the Christianity that emerges from this experience. And here is just one book of Augustine and Romans and all the interaction or what influence we have from him here. Peter Brown has written a wonderful biography of Augustine, and he is still alive, and he is undoubtedly the world's foremost authority on a period called late antiquity that includes Augustine's time. And he says of Augustine in a book called The Body and Society, compared with an all-male monochrome world, compared with Jerome and even Ambrose, Augustine moved in a monochrome, all-male world. Same color, no women. He imposed strict codes of sexual avoidance on himself and his own clergy. He would never visit a woman unchaperoned, and he did not allow even his own female relatives to enter the bishop's palace. So he comes, the family comes to visit him in Hippo, and they cannot come inside the building if they are women. That's how this works. And please bear with me, let's look more. Here is from another book about Augustine. This is James O'Donnell, who has written one of the best biographies, I think. This is 15 years ago or so. And I have as title here, Fear and Fact in Augustine's Confessions. We need to look at this critically. And true philosophy was what? In the Confessions, Augustine shows himself finding. He has a breakthrough. He sees a possibility. He will finally become celibate. That's what he sees. Augustine shows himself finding, and with it, the commitment to a sexless life. What he did not and could not see in those days was the long stretch of years of disappointment, alienation, and temptation that he was bargaining for in return to the fleeting pleasures of mystical ascent. So he has something there, that ideal that he reads about in Anthony, the monk in Egypt, and that would also impress people in the life of Simon Stylites. But it isn't the whole truth. And the church still in the world today, the Roman Catholic Church, that imposes celibacy on its clergy, has through the centuries paid an enormously high price for that unsustainable ideal. I say this advisedly. I say it without needing to explain it or defend that view very much. Listen to what O'Donnell says here. I think it is one of the most insightful statements about this man and about his views. Very often the most ferocious assertions we encounter are the ones that seem to have the least basis in fact, because they are the ones that have the greatest basis in fear. We read Augustine's account. Is it fact that drives it, or is it fear? It makes a difference. Augustine needs to tell his conversion story so badly that we do him a great favor, I believe, if we allow ourselves to entertain the possibility that his conversion story is off the rails, that it consists of assertion after assertion that are not so much true as necessary, that are not so much what Augustine knows to be the case as they are what he has to say in order not to face what might be otherwise. Augustine has a certain self-awareness, a certain awareness of human reality, of the body, of how humans are put together. He is in denial of what that is. And he makes up an ideal and makes, in some ways, tries to make us believers in that ideal. And O'Donnell says it's a story that is off the rails, story traceable to Romans. If O'Donnell is correct, as I believe he is, the second most influential reader of Romans after Luther misreads Paul's letter. And I have already taken the liberty or shown the audacity in this series to say that Luther, the most influential reader, misreads it too. And then this one, Augustine's conflicted view of human sexuality bequeaths to posterity directly a similar conflicted view. We've been conflicted about this ever since. And indirectly, a conflicted view of the body. There is in all of this a repudiation of the body, a repudiation of the material world. And here again, as reading curriculum about this time, The End of Ancient Christianity by Robert Marcus, who died some years ago, when he describes this period, he talks about as though someone comes with a meat cleaver to the world. And there is the world, and you take the meat cleaver and you chop off a big piece of reality. You just throw it out. What you throw out is actually the world itself. What we have been dealing with, he says, of this period is the reverse of such an epistemological crisis. The elimination, except for its most basic constituents such as orthography, grammar and the like, elimination from Christian discourse of a whole sphere which we might call secular, is something in the nature rather of what we might call an epistemological excision. These are fancy terms for saying that Christians conquer the world only to abandon it, only to embrace otherworldliness, only to embrace ideals that are in some ways hostile to the way things are, whether body or sex or whatever you might include in it. The shift amounted to a constriction in what was comprised within the sphere of Christian discourse, a self-limitation to one of the constituents of what had once been a richer variety and an exuberant development of thought within this newly defined world of discourse. I encourage you to read the book. He says that Christianity in late antiquity won the world to abandon it, to go to heaven as it were, and to abandon the body too. And Augustine's reading of Romans is part of that problem. We have read Wendell Berry before, his book Unsettling of America, his notion of a fracture and a separation. I will read it again. The separation of the soul from the body and from the world is no disease of the fringe, no aberration, but a fracture that runs through the mentality of religion like a geologic fault. And this rift in the mentality of religion continues to characterize the modern mind, no matter how secular or worldly it becomes. So here is that fractured world, that fractured conception, where you repudiate the body, you repudiate materiality, and as a specific element you have Augustine's conflicted view of human sexuality. The body is disappearing, says Peter Brown, the historian of late antiquity that I am using as my main source here, marriage and the structures that sprang from it could, in Augustine's view, not be derived from the original nature of the human person. That was not the ideal. A ascetic exegesis of the fall of Adam and Eve tended to preserve at the back of the minds of its exponents a lingering doubt. Society, marriage, and if not those, certainly sexual intercourse, were fundamentally alien to the original definition of humanity. And we have a reading of Romans as an influential chapter in that story, in that distortion of the story of the Bible. Can you follow me? Here is to sum up: retrieving the body, with reference to those passages in Romans 12 and chapter 13. Retrieving the body first refers to the body of the fellowship of believers, its God-ordained diversity and the need for mutual appreciation. Paul's conception of the body in this respect is in this respect communal and not individualistic. We are only a body together in a believing fellowship. It's an amazing conception. When leading historians speak of an epistemological excision occurring in late antiquity, they refer to loss of interest in the secular world and a turning toward an all-religious view of reality. That is to say, there will be a missing piece. And the piece that will be missing is in some ways the body and the world. That's what we are claiming here. Augustine is neither the cause nor the most extreme proponent of this excision, but his autobiographical reflection on the body and sexuality is, because it is so influential, it is in some ways the most searing and the most enduring. Can we retrieve the missing piece? Can we undo it? Well, what will it take? Number 5, as this presentation notes, Augustine's spiritual journey in this regard begins in Romans. Well, it begins with the autobiography of or the biography about Anthony, but not autobiography, but it's story of Anthony, and then the reading of Romans. And then, final point, retrieving the body, a huge task, includes undoing the damage of the reading tradition of Augustine. I don't think I have made a complete case here, but I hope to have started a process of reflection.